Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Medical Myth, the show about what not to do with your body. And today we are covering kind of an older myth, but definitely a fun one to get into gluten and gluten sensitivity, and also a little bit about the leaky gut syndrome myth, although that might be lumped into a different episode because I realized that I have a lot to talk about today with regard to gluten. So this has been labeled as one of the bad foods that you should stay away from. Oh, it sounds like I'm on the wrong mic.
Thank you, Uncle Beck. I don't know why it defaulted to being weird. Anyway, we're back. We're here on Medical Myths. We're talking about gluten today, and there's a weird myth that was perpetuated probably a few years ago. A lot of the articles that I found kind of came from 2015, 2016. But there's a kind of a dyad of people labeling gluten as a toxin. And while there are people who do have intolerance to gluten, namely people with celiac disease or people with a wheat-specific allergy, there are some people who need to be off of gluten, but that's not the majority of the public. And what has happened is a lot of these quackademics have taken some tiny bits of truth, twisted them, and then made people think that they need to go on these fad diets when they really don't, and are also trying to get money off of people who might have legitimate symptoms from another cause. If you can just think about people in the audience, think about all of the causes of gastrointestinal distress. Think of all of the things that can possibly cause bowel irregularity, what can cause bloating, what can cause cramping, can cause diarrhea, constipation. You can think about probably hundreds of different conditions that can all lead to the same presentation. So if you have people coming to you for medical advice and they think that you are a credible doctor, which most of these people that are peddling these diets are not, and we'll get into some of the interesting qualifications that some of these people have. But if you have somebody that's coming to you with a legitimate complaint, like of they're malnourished, because they're constantly having bowel irregularity, foods are triggering skin rashes on them, etc. And you have someone that says, "Oh yeah, well, we're not even going to look into these other things. Just take gluten out of your diet, you'll be fine." And then people start doing all these weird things, and then it's not working for them. So they start paying more money for the true gluten-free diet, which is now being advertised. You're preying on people that just need a solution. And also, if there is a different issue that's causing symptoms, you're not getting to the heart of that because you're so focused on gluten and the issues going on with gluten that you think are there. So with the whole gluten-free diet thing, there's hypotheses of a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And that's kind of, it's very nebulous. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not this is an actual thing. You have the GI Society of Canada saying that it's really not much of a thing. You have some organizations saying it might be a thing, but we don't really know what this means or what the risk factors are, etc. So there's a lot that we don't know about why people are having very real GI symptoms in the absence of celiac disease or IBS or something else. And so reasonably so, scientists have done studies looking into this. And there was a study done in 2011 by Peter Gibson in Australia. And this was a very small study that showed kind of an association between high gluten diets and gastrointestinal distress in people who didn't have celiac. So right away we have a correlation, but we don't really have a we don't have evidence of causation at this point. So, like any good scientist, um, Gibson went on to do a more academically rigorous study to look into, is there a causal relationship, or are there other variables that we need to control for? And so that's what they did. They got 37 people, so still a decently small study, and they took people who either had a diagnosis of IBS or they were self-diagnosing with this non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and they put them on different diets. So one of the diets was just kind of a normal diet. The other one had high amounts of gluten in it. Another one had a moderate amount of gluten and then some placebo. And then you had some that were just placebo. But what they did here with this study that was a little bit different was they controlled for things like lactose, which can trigger GI symptoms in a lot of people, and they removed something called FODMAPs, which is kind of a leading variable that we're looking at for causes of IBS in people. And we've seen variable success with low FODMAP diets for people that may have thought they had gluten sensitivity. But what this kind of repeat study had shown was that people, despite going off of the gluten, like they'd be on a placebo diet, which would be identical in some cases to the control diet. So they had no idea what diet they're on, still had the same GI symptoms. So they were controlling for FODMAPs and controlling for gluten, and people still had GI symptoms. So there are people out there who are having GI symptoms that we have no clue why. And the thing is, a lot of these naturopaths and quack scientists have jumped on the fact that they don't have an answer and have decided that, well, here's my answer. I'm going to give you my hypothesis and sell you my product because these scientists are not giving you any answer. And so let's talk a little bit about the FODMAP diet and kind of that hypothesis of IBS. So FODMAPs are short-chain carbohydrates that are highly fermentable. And so this stands for fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. So it's a lot of carbs they are processed by bacteria, they're fermented, and then the bacteria generate gas and other chemicals that might be irritating to the GI tract in some people. So people have been trying this elimination diet where they take the foods that are high FODMAPs, they remove them completely, and slowly add foods back in to kind of figure out what specific food triggers people have. And this ends up being a very, very restrictive diet for a little bit because you have things that are high FODMAPs, you have things that are high in gluten, wheat, rye, and barley are some of the culprits for gluten intolerant people. So it'd be very reasonable to hypothesize that, well, it must be the gluten in the wheat and not the fact that it's the carbohydrates in the wheat. You also have things like a lot of fruits fall into this high FODMAP list, a lot of vegetables as well, a lot of proteins. And then also have a lot of gluten-free products that end up on this low FODMAP diet. So it's very easy to say it's the gluten when it might just be the FODMAPs. But there's still, again, a lot of debate in whether or not this is the cause for a lot of people. And something that I want to mention before we really go into some more of nitty-gritty things with celiac disease, I want to clarify that there are people who have these unexplained GI symptoms. And if somebody believes that gluten is a cause of their symptoms and they don't want to eat gluten, that's absolutely fine. You are not obligated to eat any food that you don't want to eat. So I'm not coming at people who want to purchase gluten-free foods. That's your own personal preference. If you want to do that, go for it. My problem is the fad of quack practitioners trying to sell people this diet and sell people genetic tests and sell people their bullshit, and then prevent them also from getting medically evaluated for other causes of their discomfort. So that's really why I'm debunking this myth. It's not to force people to eat gluten. That is not at all what I'm trying to do, but try to reduce some of the fear around gluten and also uh, prevent people from being scammed by poor scientists. So let's talk a little bit about celiac disease, because this is something that is a known reason why people need to be off of gluten. And celiac disease is it's inheritable. It's largely genetic, but there are some other components to it as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about multifactorial inheritance today. And so celiac disease is a gluten intolerance related to the genes HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8, which are associated with many different autoimmune diseases. But this is essentially an autoimmune disease. So you have people that build up antibodies. So these genes that they have are for T cells, which then will trigger antibody released by B cells to target tissue transglutaminase. So you have anti-tissue transglutaminase antibodies and also anti-gliadin antibodies. So where most people would not have an immune response to the protein gluten, celiac patients do. And they release these antibodies against their own gut tissue and against the proteins to where they get their microvilli in their intestines become blunted, and it is a malabsorptive diarrhea. So the biggest problem with celiac is not necessarily the diarrhea itself or the discomfort itself. It's the fact that you can't absorb nutrients. So it is a malnutrition disease. And while the genetics here are a primary component, it's important to note that this is multifactorial. So you can have the genes and not have the disease. And this is going to be very important when we go to debunking some of the quack medicine. So there are a few ways that we can diagnose somebody with celiac disease. So normally they'll have symptoms of GI distress, and they might have a rash called dermatitis herpetiformis, which is a buildup of IgA antibodies in the skin, resulting from this excessive production of IgA in the GI tract against gliadin. So you have someone coming in with these symptoms, and then you typically you'll get their subjective history. They'll tell you about their symptoms, and then you'll do a test for tissue transglutaminase or an anti-gliadin test. And the best test of all of them is to do a tissue biopsy. If you can actually see the blunted villi in the intestinal tract, you know pretty much for sure that this person is not absorbing food well, and that is characteristic of celiac disease. So with this multifactorial inheritance, you can pass on the gene to your kids, and they might have risk of celiac, but there are other factors involved within developing celiac disease in itself. And I think I lost the picture I was looking for. Here, so I'll share this one. So there's a concept of liability, and this is an interesting concept. So you have somebody who most people you're going to eat gluten, and then you have the smaller subset of the population that is positive for HLA-DQ2 or DQ8, and there are other variables that need to be involved in order to actually give somebody the presentation of celiac disease. So this could be the expression of these genes that they have. So not everyone that has these genes actually express them. And so the expression might be triggered by epigenetics, so methylation and demethylation or acetylation patterns of the genes that tell them to turn on or off. Other factors like the microbiome in the gut during development can contribute to the development of symptoms and of a clinical presentation. So you have to consider all of these factors together and think of this as like when we're talking about liability, it's adding on multiple risk factors to get to a higher likelihood of having a presentation. So like taking like in baseball, you have a 3 strikes you're out policy, right? So it's you can you can get a first strike and not be eliminated from you won't get out from 1 strike. You have a second strike, you're getting closer and closer to being struck out. Third strike, finally, now you are out. So it's like this. So HLA-DQ2 or DQ8 is your first strike, and then your epigenetics might be your second strike, and your microbiome be your third strike, and now you have celiac disease. So we're going to see a lot of people trying to say that you should genetically test people for HLA-DQ2 or DQ8. But think about this. If you need multiple factors in order to present with celiac disease, you could be testing the people who have the gene but do not present with the disease. And so what this does is you make a lot of people think that they have celiac when they don't. And so you put them on a very restrictive diet when they don't need to be on one, and you ignore other possibilities of differentials that could be the result, could be the cause of their GI distress, or you have people that have very vague symptoms that aren't even related to food. People will say that headache is a symptom of celiac, which, yeah, if you're malnourished, you can get headaches. You can get brain fog. You can get a wide variety of I'm just not feeling super well symptoms. But while celiac might be a cause of those symptoms, it's probably not the only cause. And you can't just say that all people that present with headache have celiac. That's completely dishonest of a point. And they don't specifically say that. But what they do is they make you connect the dots for yourself. So they list out a bunch of vague symptoms like, oh, these are all symptoms of gluten intolerance. And then you might say, oh, well, I had a headache the other day. So that's on the list. So I must have this condition. So they make you connect the dots on your own to think that you have this problem. And then they're going to give you their diet recommendations and their supplements and their treatments. But this is a poor test. So genetic testing is not reliable to determine whether or not somebody actually has a clinical celiac. The other condition that could be playing into this is IBS. And IBS is a very nebulous kind of disease because it's very non-specific. And in fact, it is a diagnosis of exclusion. So you can't diagnose somebody with IBS until you've ruled everything else out. And so IBS, you could have somebody with constipation, predominant IBS. You can have diarrhea, predominant IBS. And this is what we consider to be a functional diarrhea or a functional constipation, which is in contrast to celiac disease in that it's more of there's a hypothesis with gut microbiome, there's hypotheses with stress levels, hypotheses with recent infection, other kind of triggering factors that would essentially cause your colon to not respond as well and tell your tell your body that you shouldn't work properly. It's very nebulous and it's very hard to explain an exact presentation because we don't know a lot about IBS. So basically, we rule everything else out, and you still have symptoms. So we're going to say that you have IBS. But this is something related more to triggers, whereas celiac disease is related more to autoimmunity and malabsorption. So these are completely different clinical presentations. And the last one, there are a very small minority of people that have a wheat allergy, like an actual allergy to wheat products, not necessarily to the gluten, although gluten can be a factor in this as well. But this is IgE mediated, usually, sometimes IgG or IgA mediated food allergies. But this is more akin to like what you typically think of with an allergic reaction, but you can get some GI symptoms as well because you're getting the IgE instead of in like your airways, you're getting the IgE in your GI tract. So that's like about 0.2 to 1% of the population have a wheat allergy. So that's also a possibility, but still a different mechanism entirely. So kind of after looking at that background of the confusion of what we don't really know about the gluten issue, we get some people who think that they know a lot more than they actually do. And I'm going to pull up this lovely person. We'll go to the website first and then we'll talk about this person and who he is. So somebody by the name of Peter Osborne, he claims the title of doctor, and he has this whole gluten-free society that is all fear-mongering, and he even has like a quiz of self-reporting where you can just go in and list off your symptoms, and it'll tell you if you're gluten sensitive. He has a glutenology masterclass, which it says free access. It is not a free program. It's $200 for the first program and $800 for the second program for glutenology to learn about the true gluten-free diet, which no true Scotsman here. He goes in and says, well, if you did a gluten-free diet and it didn't work for you, well, you're just not doing the right gluten-free diet. So you have to do mine. So he plays a lot of fear-mongering games and uses a lot of poor reasoning to make people think basically that everybody has celiac or this non-celiac gluten sensitivity that can't really be pinned down at all. So who is this man? Who is Dr. Osborne? This was cringy to read into. But Dr. Osborne is a chiropractor, and the scarier thing is he is a doctor of pastoral science. And I looked into what this is. There's a whole degree, and I think I've primarily seen it in Texas, where you can get a doctorate of pastoral medicine. And I might do a whole episode on pastoral medicine, but they present themselves to be legitimate medical offices. You almost will not be able to tell the difference between their office and a legitimate medical office, but their objective is treating people's illness through biblical medicine, which is super cringy. He also claims to be an expert in functional nutrition and is board certified with the American Clinical Board of Nutrition, which is not the same as the board of like registered dietitians. So dietitians are legitimate professionals in the field of diet. They are the experts and the go-to for dietary concerns. Nutritionists have almost no regulation. Anybody can take an online stupid class and call themselves a nutritionist. So this tells me nothing about his expertise in nutrition. And in fact, he had to change his whole marketing of himself because he got reprimanded by the Chiropractic Board of Texas for false claims. And I should pull this up because this is hilarious. So in 2015, Dr. Osborne was reprimanded by the Board of Chiropractic, which, I mean, it's impressive at all that they did any regulation on this. But what they found is that he was being reviewed for advertising himself as a functional medicine physician and using the title of physician. So what I'm kind of gathering here is that on this other website that now says functional nutrition expert, I'm guessing it used to say functional medicine physician, and he had to change it because his license got suspended for doing that. But also, he's not going to give any evidence for what expertise he has. He just claims that he is an expert. So he's a quack. He is an absolute quack who tries to make himself seem more legitimate than what actually isn't. Yeah, the chiropractors have an issue with false claims. I'm absolutely surprised that they intervened on this at all. But this is the guy who is claiming to know about glutenology, whatever the fuck that is. And so this is why this website, I mean, apart from everything that is actually said on his site, but more reason to not go along with his claims mentioned on the website. So he has this whole website, and this particular article talks about the symptoms of gluten intolerance. What are they? So he says that gluten is a type of protein found in grains. Those with celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or gluten intolerance. I love that he lumps in a separate gluten intolerance that is just completely vague and does not go into any further detail on this. Need to avoid gluten to prevent the inflammation and damage it can cause. And the symptoms of gluten sensitivity / intolerance are very diverse. For patients with celiac disease, gluten commonly causes inflammation in the small intestine. That is the definition of celiac. That is correct. This inflammation can lead to symptoms of gas, bloating, diarrhea, and intestinal pain. And then he says, unfortunately, gluten-related symptoms are not limited or restricted to the GI tract. There are numerous symptoms, diseases, and syndromes that gluten can either cause or contribute to. And he's not wrong in that celiac disease is a syndrome. It is like when we say a syndrome, it affects multiple bodies systems. And we do see that with celiac because it is an autoimmune disease. But there's something that he does throughout this article that is dishonest and misleading, in that he often cites celiac disease and the symptoms associated with celiac disease and then extrapolates them to non-celiac gluten sensitivity and this vague gluten intolerance. So the stuff that he says about celiac in a lot of ways is accurate. The problem is most people don't have celiac and they might have similar symptoms, but they are not celiac. So their presentation is probably not related to the gluten. But he's going to say, he's essentially going to mislead people into thinking that everybody has celiac, and he's going to equivocate celiac disease with non-celiac diseases. So let's read more about his thoughts. And I initially watched this little video. It's over an hour, so I'm not going to waste your time because he says a lot of the same things down here in the article. And then, of course, he advertises his glutenology masterclass. So he calls this the gluten hydra of gluten sensitivity causing all of these varieties of symptoms. And he says, studies show that from first onset of symptoms, it can take the average patient almost 10 years to get a formal diagnosis from their doctor. Why does it take so long to get a diagnosis? Simply put, both patients and doctors alike do not often recognize the vast array of symptoms that gluten can cause. So listen to this, to the wording. So we're talking diagnosis of celiac, which is the gluten is not the problem. The autoimmunity is the problem. The gluten itself is not, it's not toxic. It's not a toxin. It's the autoimmune disease that causes the antibody release to destroy your intestines when exposed to gluten. So he's already swapping words in and making you think that gluten is the cause when having mentioned diagnosis of celiac disease. When doctors do not have an understanding of the broad symptoms gluten can cause, medications are oftentimes prescribed to treat the gluten-induced symptoms. This can lead to prolonged failure to actually accurately diagnose celiac disease or gluten sensitivity/intolerance. So again, now the words are switching back to celiac disease or gluten sensitivity when he mentioned that gluten is the toxin. So he's not even consistent about what the problem is at all. I'm very, like, a lot of this is very confusing to try to suss out what his actual claims are because he waffles and flip-flops on what the actual claim is. Like, is the claim that everyone has celiac? Is the claim that gluten is a toxin? What is the claim being made here? Can you be consistent in where you're going with your argument? So he says subtle symptoms of gluten exposure. So again, gluten exposure, not gluten sensitivity, gluten exposure are common before disease is diagnosed. Many people develop symptoms that are not classified as disease. Yeah, a lot of these symptoms we're going to see happen frequently in the general population. I don't know a single person who has not gotten a headache at least once in their life. Probably, you know what? Most people have probably had more than one headache in their life. And I'm willing to bet most people in this audience had a headache at some point in the past 2 weeks. It's just very common, and there are multiple causes of a headache. These symptoms may be dismissed as minor irritations by patients and doctors alike, but they are important to recognize because they are oftentimes indicative of a gluten issue years before major disease develops. So he's trying to say, well, you had this symptom, and this symptom is associated with celiac disease. So you might have celiac, but just not know it yet and not have major symptoms. And there's something I want to address here. Again, going back to the celiac disease, like there's this iceberg diagram that I really want to show you if I can find it. But with any disease presentation, of course, there are degrees of severity. And oh, here we go. So we have degrees of disease severity. And as I mentioned, you can have the genetic marker for celiac and not have a clinical disease at all. So they would be included on this diagram as well. So you have this. You have people you don't see clinically and the people you do see. So the people above the water in this iceberg are what you know to be celiac. Like, it's very textbook, pretty obviously symptomatic celiac disease. They're getting malnourished. They've got their anti-transglutaminase antibodies. They've got their anti-gliadin antibodies. They have a positive biopsy. It's very clear that this is celiac disease. You have a presentation of silent celiac disease where they have intestinal damage, but they might not have symptoms. So this might be an early presentation that could progress. And this is all, of course, with continued gluten exposure in these patients. So you might have people that you don't see as having celiac, but they do. And that's really difficult to diagnose because they're not presenting with anything. And you're not just going to randomly biopsy people's intestines if they don't have symptoms. So that's one we're not going to do a whole lot for. And late celiac disease, where they might have the disease, but they don't have any intestinal damage. And this often is what we get when we have a celiac patient taken off of gluten products. You can actually get full recovery of the intestine after removing gluten from the diet in celiac patients. So latent disease could be somebody that has no symptoms but has the disease and no damage yet. So this could progress further, or this could be somebody who had symptoms and no longer does because they removed gluten. So with any disease, you're going to have these degrees of severity, but you're not going to change the treatment of somebody based on a hypothetical disease severity when you don't have any evidence otherwise to suggest that they have celiac. So these people in this article are capitalizing on, well, what if you do in the future? What if you do have these symptoms in the future? And that's, of course, especially for people who have anxiety about medicine and anxiety about their own illness. You might panic about, like, take other diseases. Like, what if I have cancer in the future? If I sat down and I thought hard to myself, well, what if someday I got cancer? Maybe you'd want to, of course, prevent yourself from having that. But I'm not going to go on chemo. I'm not going to start a chemotherapy because I might have cancer someday. That's unrealistic and it's dangerous. There are risks to a gluten-free diet. You have malabsorption that can happen from not going on, from not having gluten. You're getting less fortification in these gluten-free foods that you'd get from more standard bread products. Like you can see iron deficiencies, you can see vitamin B deficiencies. So there is risk, and there are going to have to take steps to supplement those things if you go on a gluten-free diet. So you don't want to unnecessarily intervene with somebody who is asymptomatic. But these people are trying to make money, and they're trying to get you to believe that you have this and get you to be afraid of the potential of having symptoms in the future, that they're going to market this to you. And people have enough medical anxiety without you giving them more. So I really dislike the fact that people do this. So what are these subtle symptoms that they are claiming are related to gluten? Of course, you have GI symptoms: constipation, loose bowels, heartburn, indigestion, bloating, blood in the stool. Usually that's not related to gluten. That could be related to celiac disease. It could be related to irritable bowel syndrome. Like, not usually, but things like inflammatory bowel disease, so IBD, like Crohn's and UC, are really where you're going to see blood in the stool. Or if you have like a crazy infection of E. coli or something, you can get blood in your stool. That's not really a symptom of gluten. If you have blood in your stool, probably you need to be screened for cancer. You need to be screened for IBD. There's a whole workup you need to go through for blood in the stool. Like, don't just take gluten out of your diet because you have blood in your stool. It could also be hemorrhoids. You could have hemorrhoids and have blood in your stool. There's lots of possibilities. It could also be that you're just really, really constipated. That can cause blood in your stool if you're incredibly constipated. So they're putting lots of things on the list to scare people, but I hope that you're getting extra help if you have blood in your stool. Oral symptoms. They're claiming that bleeding gums, cavities, swollen tongue, cold sore. They're claiming that cold sores are caused by gluten, which we know is not true. Like, I totally missed this one when I was reading it the first time. You have things like there's a difference between a cold sore and an aphthous ulcer, like a canker sore. Like a cold sore is caused by herpes, and herpes is not caused by gluten. Like, so we essentially have a claim here that herpes is caused by gluten, which that could be a really funny meme actually. But aphthous ulcers are kind of like the canker sores that might think of it as a cold sore if it's in the right place. Those can be related to Crohn's disease and other autoimmune disease. So I could see somebody with celiac presenting with aphthous ulcers due to autoimmunity, but that is related to the autoimmunity and not related to the gluten. So, no. Tonsil stones. They are claiming that tonsil stones are a result of gluten. They're saying anosmia, loss of smell, is related to gluten. So a lot of just solid no. We do not have evidence to suggest these. Swollen tongue, cavities, and bleeding gums, I could see as related to malabsorption in celiac patients. So this might have some validity. In swollen tongue, probably referring to glossitis, which can be a result of iron or B12 deficiencies. And that is a reasonable result of celiac disease. Because if you can't digest and absorb food, then you could get nutritionally deficient. So this is not a result of gluten. This is a result of nutritional deficiency, like a very extreme B12 deficiency, brain fog, fatigue, mood swings, irritability, very vague symptoms that I bet, like I was irritable this past week. I cannot chalk that up to gluten. I also can't really exclude it, but I get irritable sometimes, and that's just part of life. Sometimes I feel fatigued. I've also been on an early morning shift the past few weeks. Sometimes I get brain fog. You have people that report more frequent brain fog with things like celiac disease because they can't absorb food. And you have the nutritional deficiencies, again, B12 and folate, you get neurologic symptoms with those deficiencies. So, yeah, someone with celiac probably does present with these. But just because you've ever experienced irritability does not mean that you have celiac disease. Immune symptoms, aggressive outdoor allergies, which could be related if you had a wheat allergy in that IgE presentation. You probably also have other IgE related diseases. So I'll give that for wheat allergy, but not gluten related. That's often related to other compounds in the wheat itself. Shortness of breath caused by gluten, recurring infections, chronic cough, and spontaneous nosebleeds. And all of the, like, you keep reading down this list, and it gets more and more just like catching everybody. Like the sensitivity versus specificity of these symptoms list is astounding. The fact that you could literally have anything wrong with you at all, and then he'll chalk it up to gluten. Like he really thinks that gluten is like the bane of human existence, which is kind of hilarious. Like he claims that anxiety and he lumps anxiety as a menstrual symptom. So anxiety specifically related to menstruation is caused by gluten. Breast tenderness during menses is caused by gluten, which we know that that's related to estrogen levels. Water retention, short stature. So being short is because that I ate too much gluten. Muscle stiffness, pain and swelling, not related to the time that you got in a car accident. It's actually related to eating gluten that one time. Inability to lose weight, inability to gain weight, pre-diabetic blood sugars. This is absolutely ridiculous. Like, what disease is not on this list? What symptom is not here? Like, you are literally just telling everybody that they have gluten intolerance. with no justification to back it up. Like, I'd love to see your sources about why you think these are related. Give me the data. I mean, he has articles that say more in-depth information that legit, like, I clicked on these links, and for the neurologic symptoms, he goes on to leaky brain syndrome, which is not a thing. It does not exist. Like, there are claims that gluten causes increased blood-brain barrier permeability, and he links gluten to Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and autism because of leaky brain syndrome, which is not a thing. And there's also leaky gut, which I was going to address more in today's episode, but I'll give you the TLDR version of this. But they think that gluten causes this uncontrollable inflammation, and then in that it causes your gut to become permeable and to just let everything in, and then cause antibody nonsense all throughout your body. And there's no evidence really to back this up. There is a test that you can do that chiros, functional medicine practitioners, naturopaths like to use to diagnose leaky gut syndrome, and it's the lactulose mannitol test. And so what happens is mannitol and lactulose are osmotic diuretics and osmotic laxatives. So, in fact, you use mannitol and lactulose to reduce brain swelling sometimes, because the sugars, if you think about the osmosis, you have water that follows solute. So if you dissolve a whole bunch of sugar, water is going to reduce that concentration as much as it can across membranes. It's going to follow to equilibrate the concentrations across the membrane. So this is what's happening here with mannitol. You put this sugar in the GI tract, and it draws out excess water into the GI tract, so you can get rid of it. So someone who has brain swelling, or someone who has congestive heart failure that has too much blood volume and too much tissue volume, you give them this mannitol to then have them pee out or poop out all of the excess water. So what they're hypothesizing is that if you give somebody lactulose or mannitol, that it should go through their GI tract and not end up in urine. So you should just poop all of this out. So their hypothesis is that if you have this sugar showing up in your urine, then that means that it got there somehow, that there's some permeability in your gut to allow that to happen. And this test really is not useful to diagnose this not evidence-based leaky gut syndrome. It's used to follow things like autoimmune disease, like celiac and Crohn's disease and UC, because those diseases are known to have increased gut permeability. So essentially, like, you're doing a test to confirm something that you already know. So you can't really use it to diagnose celiac. You would use it to follow their treatment, to say, is my treatment of their celiac disease working, or is it not? If you have an improvement in your gut permeability throughout the course of your treatment, and you demonstrate that with the lactulose mannitol test, then that could show that your treatment protocol is working for celiac or for IBD or what have you. But it's not useful to diagnose it, because it's like somebody who has a massive GI bleed. You already know they're bleeding out of their butthole, so you've seen this. Like, they're already at the hospital for a GI bleed, and then you wanted to do an extra test to see if they were bleeding. Like, you know that they're bleeding. It's not giving you any new information. So that's what's happening with the lactulose mannitol test. It's not giving you any information that we didn't already know. So it's a useless test. So there are gluten-related diseases. They say if left undiagnosed, gluten exposure over long periods of time can cause or contribute to a host of different health issues. So right off the bat, this sentence says that the gluten exposure itself is causing symptoms and it's causing different health issues. And then this symptom list, this list is it's a list of symptoms, diseases, and syndromes that, and he's being very vague now. So this is now a catch-all, have been linked to gluten sensitivity. So we have a correlation at best. And some of them are caused by gluten. Some of them are exacerbated by gluten. And some of them clinically resolve or improve with a gluten-free diet. He gives no evidence for any of these three claims. And he also does not specify which of these diseases are which of these categories. So he literally just listed an entire medical dictionary of diseases and was like, well, there's an association that these diseases are related to gluten, but think about it. If the majority of the population consumes gluten, I'm willing to bet that if you took these people, all of the people that have ADHD, the majority of people that have ADHD consume gluten in their diet regularly. But that does not mean that the gluten was the cause of their ADHD. So this is a correlation versus causation argument, and they are not demonstrating the causal relationship, and they're not even saying, they're not even explicitly listing which specific claim is related to which specific disease. So I don't even know where the argument is with this, but abdominal pain and distension, okay, sure, pretty big. Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune disease. So sure, can you have Addison's and celiac? Yeah. Are you pretty likely, if you have one autoimmune disease, to have another one? Yeah. Yeah, you are. Again, going back to multifactorial inheritance. But ADHD, no, there's no evidence that gluten causes ADHD. There's no evidence that gluten causes anxiety or apathy or arthritis. Except for, again, relating back to autoimmune disease. They have other things on here, just very non-specific bone pain. They have blepharitis, so inflammation of your eyelids. Definitely the gluten. Bipolar disease. Bone fractures. Cancer. Cataracts. Chronic fatigue syndrome. Coronary artery disease. Cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease, delayed puberty, depression, diabetes type 1, which actually they do, celiac disease and type 1 diabetes do have the same HLA genotype, usually they're associated. But again, this is not because of the gluten. This is because of autoimmune disease. These are inheritable autoimmune diseases. Down syndrome, they are claiming, is caused by gluten, and there is a correlation, but there's no evidence for causation between gluten and Down syndrome. Pain with menstruation, early menopause, endometriosis. So gluten is now causing or exacerbating the fact that your uterine tissue migrated somewhere else and is causing pain. Like endometriosis is endometrial tissue from the uterus that ends up outside of the uterus. Definitely caused by gluten. Like this is, and the list goes on and on and on. And they have so many dog whistles here for mental retardation. So they are very anti neurodivergent people here. They're trying to fearmonger in ways that many people have with neurodivergent patients, making them feel like they are the problem when they are not. Autism is not anybody's fault, and it is not something to be ashamed of. And it is absolutely upsetting that people are constantly trying to tell autistic people that they are not, that they are diseased and that they are not normal. This is incredibly toxic and problematic information. They're claiming schizophrenia, which there's enough stigma with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. There's enough stigma with ADHD, enough stigma with Alzheimer's disease. So he listed like literally every symptom known to man and said, yeah, well, it's obviously the gluten. And he's saying that it does that because of inflammation. And I don't really need to read the whole paragraph, but he goes on to say, so we started off this article with celiac disease is a problem. You can have symptoms of celiac disease. You might have celiac disease and not know about it, which are all legitimate points. And a lot of the symptoms that he mentioned of celiac disease are legitimate symptoms of celiac disease. And then we go into, well, but you could have just gluten intolerance and not be celiac. And here's all of the symptoms that you could have that could tell you that you're gluten intolerant. And also now we're finally reaching gluten is toxic. So we're shifting the argument multiple times to eventually get to the point of gluten bad. So it says doctors and patients alike have often contemplated why some people experience no symptoms for years before being diagnosed with gluten-related illnesses. Research shows that gluten can be degraded into smaller proteins that mimic the painkiller morphine. Wow, this is dishonest because the research does not show that gluten acts like morphine. Sure, there are plenty of molecules that anything can be broken down into that, like the proteins that resemble a structure of another structure. Sure. Gluten is not being metabolized to morphine. I have no clue where he got this, but it's false. There's no evidence to suggest that. These proteins, sometimes referred to, are thought to mask the inflammatory damage caused by gluten in some patients. So you can be asymptomatic for gluten insensitivity because it's not because you don't have a disease. You're asymptomatic because your gluten is becoming morphine and masking your response so that you just don't know about it. So this is something that a lot of con artists are really good at, where they say, well, you don't know that you don't have this disease, and it's possible. In fact, I'm suggesting it's very likely that you actually do have this disease, but you just don't know about it because of this other problem that I made up. This is ridiculous. And I hate that people buy into this bullshit because when you read it and analyze it, it's pretty obvious that this is the tactic that he's taking. He says, researchers believe that somewhere between 6 and 33% of all Americans may be gluten sensitive, and that 1 in 100 have a severe form of this sensitivity causing the autoimmune intestinal disease, celiac sprue, or celiac disease. And then he's saying that everybody in America should be screened for gluten sensitivity. No, they should not. There's no reason to screen asymptomatic people for a disease. And again, the fact that you can have the genes, you can have HLA DQ2 or DQ8 positive and not have the disease, as I mentioned before, with multifactorial inheritance. But he capitalizes on this point. So he made you believe with this whole list of symptoms that you have a gluten insensitivity and you just don't know about it because gluten is morphine. And so you need to get tested. And good news, the good news for you is that he has genetic testing that you can do through his shop. And you can do without a doctor's visit. So he claims that the traditional gluten intolerance test is often incorrect because they only measure the antibodies against gliadin or anti-tissue transglutaminase. But you might have one of these diseases on my giant list of catch-all terms and test negative for celiac disease. But you're probably being masked by your gluten morphine so that you just don't know about it. So this test that was negative is probably wrong because I said so. So do my test. And he's right. He's right in that the traditional tests are not 100% accurate. And that's true, which is why we have so many different layers of testing. You've got the antibodies, you got clinical presentation, you've got the biopsy that can all work together to give you an index of clinical suspicion. And sure, like if someone came in and said, I took gluten out of my diet and I felt better, and they wanted to continue on that diet, like, okay, I might not need to do these tests. Oftentimes, these tests are not even done because if you have somebody that you have high suspicion of celiac and you take them off gluten and get better, what's the point in doing a test if the diet's doing well enough for them? So he's right in this little thing, but this does not mean that you need to be tested for your genetics. And he's going to say that you need to get this HLA DQ2 and DQ8 test, but I don't know if it's on this page or a different page. But he also tests for HLA DQ1 and DQ3, which are not associated with celiac. And there's minimal evidence at all suggesting that they would be related to non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But he gives you the test anyway. And so you're catching people, again, who might have the gene but don't have symptoms and don't have the disease, that now he can say, you tested positive, you have celiac, buy my shit. And unfortunately, this is very successful of a marketing tactic. And he's suggesting that everybody with the conditions on that list that he mentioned, but mostly sticking to this specific group of people that we can stigmatize and people more likely to buy my products, should absolutely get tested, such as, again, bringing people with autism and ADHD and bipolar or schizophrenia. So sleep apnea is on this list now too, diabetes. And a lot of people who want to be free of this condition that causes them to be ostracized from society. Like if I could, like if I was constantly harassed by quack medical professionals and society saying that you're not good enough to exist because you have ADHD or autism or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And somebody said, yeah, you could be rid of all that societal stigma by going gluten-free and doing my diet. I don't know many people that wouldn't try it because that stigma is powerful and it ruins people's lives. So this is preying on already vulnerable people and people that we should be supporting and reducing their stigma, reducing their being harassed by society. How about we address that instead of selling them bullshit? But no, there's always somebody who needs to profit off of somebody else's misery. And this is one of those people with his pastoral medicine and his chiropractic. And he also appeared on Fox News to talk about this, which tells you a lot about his credibility. I want to do his gluten sensitivity quiz or whatever it is. Because I think it'd be funny to see if I know that I have to give him my email probably, but I'll at least show you the quiz. Oh, look at his best-selling products. We have Ultra Nutrients. What is even in this? Oh, it's out of stock. Oh no. Ultra Nutrients. I can't even zoom in on this. It's very... Oh, here we go. It's a lot of vitamins. Cool. All right. Very expensive. $40 P if you want that. Oh my god. Okay, of course he is anti-MSG, anti-natural flavors. Wow, okay. I didn't even read this page before, but... Oh, he has supplements for Gluten Shield, which is a comprehensive digestive formula that contains gluten-degrading enzymes. I'm curious about this. Okay, so we have protease. Yeah, okay. That would digest gluten as it is a protein, and proteases digest proteins. It's also got lipase and a lot of enzymes in here that you make on your own that you don't need because you make these. And it's not that, like, for people with celiac, again, it's not that they are missing enzymes. The issue is not the fact that they can't digest gluten. The issue is that they have an antibody response to it. So even if you had celiac and you gave somebody like proteases, that's not going to solve the autoimmunity. So this is absolutely worthless. Does not contain gluten, grain, MSG, soy, yeast, dairy, GMOs, fillers, preservatives, synthetics, or any other hidden ingredients. He's playing into a lot of these fear-mongery things. Why? Don't give this to your children. Why even say things like this? Where's your quiz? I want to go back to your quiz. No, I don't want your coupons, and I don't want your products. I want to find the... We gotta go back a little bit more. We're gonna find the quiz. But I don't remember where I found the quiz before. Oh, I could probably... Bet it's in here. All the way down. Can I find... Oh, here we go. Take the sensitivity test. All right. Gluten-free diet is not a trend. Oh, and here's where they up on the antibody test. Unfortunately, doctors do use inaccurate and antiquated tests I mean, any test can give false negative results, but your test has an incredibly high risk of false positives, which is what you want because they'll buy your stuff. So this is a self-reporting gluten sensitivity test. We're going to take it because I apparently hate myself enough. What do you think? Do you think that I'm going to be positive for gluten sensitivity? Okay, so I'm going to answer this completely honestly. And I'm loving how vague the questions are going to be because it's not going to be giving specific time frames or like, if you uh, go to a doctor and they ask you about certain symptoms within a specific time frame, like when you're screening for anxiety and depression, you're asked like, have you had any of these symptoms within the past 2 weeks? And they're very specific about do you have this all the time, most of the time, sometimes, or never. So like every day of the week, more than half the days, less than half the days, or almost none of the days. And so that can give you more of a spectrum of results. This is just like, do you experience any of these gut symptoms? When? Like now, right at this moment, or just sometimes? Well, I know that I crave cake, cookies, and brownies sometimes, so I'm gonna click yes. Sometimes I crave high sugar foods. I do. Intestinal bloating or gas after eating. I mean, I wouldn't say frequent. I don't have IBS. Sometimes I get heartburn. Yeah, like there's a time when I did the spicy ramen challenge and I got heartburn. Uh, Sometimes I feel constipated. I have had that before. Sometimes I've had diarrhea. That's happened before. Not Okay, I'll give them not frequent nausea or vomiting. No difficulty gaining weight. Unfortunately. No iron deficiency anemia. Okay, so I've got a few things here. Okay. Um, Head and nervous system symptoms. Okay, so frequent headaches. Not frequent, but I have had. Is this? And they don't even say the like. They don't even list the question now. They just say check all that apply. I've had sinus congestion before. I haven't really had migraines. Like I don't really have a migraine history. So I'm just gonna list the things that I have right now, or have experienced more frequently. Poor memory. I feel like I do sometimes. Sometimes I do have difficulty recalling words. Sometimes I do get brain fog. Like this past week, I did because I worked really early in the morning. Sometimes I have problems concentrating. I've not been diagnosed with ADHD. I don't get vertigo. I have, depression. Yeah, I've had that, especially burnout recently. Yeah, I've had anxiety. I've had irrational irritability. Yeah, I do that sometimes. I've had mood swings. Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay. So I've got several on that list. Uh, think about for yourselves in the audience, like how many of these would you need to check off on this list? This one I don't have as much of, so I'm going to click none of the above for muscle pains. Hormonal symptoms, fatigue. I had that when I wasn't sleeping. Inability to lose weight. No, I haven't had that. Difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. Yeah, it's when I'm on a weird sleep schedule. Menstrual. Yeah, PMS. Yeah, I used to get very painful periods. I don't now because I'm on testosterone. But no thyroid disease, no diabetes. Yeah, none of that. Okay, none of these. None of the above. Okay. Skin problems. I've had a rash before. Yeah, I haven't. I've had eczema before. Cool. I've had none of these, thankfully. I love that they say elevated liver enzymes as if I'm gonna stop sharing briefly while I enter my email address because I'm going to let them send this to me. And I'm going to read you my results. And, I'm probably going to get weird spam from these people, but that's fine because it'll just give me more content to debunk later. So here we go. We're going to find out, am I gluten sensitive from my report? And keep in mind, like, I don't really have any GI symptoms right now, but I've had them occasionally. My email's being, like, very, very slow, so hopefully it'll show up. Did it go to spam? Let's see if it went to spam. Oh, here we go. I got it. My results are in. Wow. Wow. This is hilarious. Okay. Okay. Um all right. You're ready. Are you ready for this? These are my results. Ben, based on the selections you made, you might be gluten sensitive. Let me be the first to say congratulations. Why congratulations? Because now you know. And honestly, that's the first step. Now, you don't know it yet, but the next 8 days are going to feel like Christmas. My God, wow. He's giving me a free gift to make my gluten-free transition. So he says I might be. So that's not a specific answer. Like, it tells me absolutely nothing. And it's like making me think that that's a yes, but it's neither a yes or a no. And like, but here you go. Have my shit. So there you go. I'm gluten insensitive, guys. I'm going to be cured. If I remove gluten, I just, won't have any problems anymore. So I think that's kind of where we're going to end the episode because I don't know how to make the show any more interesting than finding out that I'm apparently gluten sensitive. But does anybody in the chat have any questions about things that we covered? I know we kind of went down the rabbit hole of celiac disease and multifactorial inheritance and all that. But if you have any questions, let me know. And I will for sure be doing an episode on pastoral medicine. That is going to happen. And I'm going to be doing one on leaky brain syndrome. So, oh, where's the leaky gut thing? I don't know. We talked a little bit about the leaky gut thing. Are you asking the guy about the leaky gut thing? Yeah, he practices functional medicine, which I did a whole debunk on a few weeks ago. It's not a legitimate field of medicine. It's not. They don't even require you to be a doctor or physician assistant or nurse practitioner or anything with actual prescribing power to be part of that specialty. They license like chiropractors, naturopaths, et cetera, et cetera. Here's a question. How much of the problem do you think is the worried well as opposed to, say, genuine undiagnosed IBS and similar conditions? I think it's both. I think a lot of people with legitimate symptoms have IBS, probably. But I think a lot of people that are falling into this are the worried well. I think there is a lot of nocebo effect happening here, as we saw within the. I know a lot of you arrived kind of late, but the study that I covered first talked about removing, like, they removed gluten and lactose and FODMAPs and other potential GI triggers, and people still had symptoms. Like they reported the same symptoms even when like all the variables were removed. So it's very odd, and we don't know a lot of the answer here. And this is, I think, the most honest thing we can say about whether or not there is a non-celiac gluten sensitivity is that we don't know enough yet. There might be some people that have a reaction like that that we just don't know about. So it's dishonest for anybody to say that there is a condition like that when the correct answer is we don't know. So I think, like, I wish I could offer more information on that, but it's just very unclear at this point. So with that being said, if anybody wants to ask me more questions, maybe, you know what, maybe I should do a special medical myths Q&A where people can ask whatever questions they have about any medical myths episode that we've done. How do you determine sensitivity? That's the thing. It's a very vague term. And I think they're using it to say people who have symptoms, but no objective finding. Like with celiac, you have an objective finding to demonstrate celiac. With wheat allergy, you have the same antibody test you can do. So with the sensitivity, it's like I have symptoms, but I don't know why. And it's definitely a catch-all term. Oh, Farron, thank you for the super chat for the Pebbles debauchery. Yeah, and I will read your comment about Pebbles' leaky gut from Pebbles'. Farron has made a lot of Pebbles fisting jokes, which is hilarious. But no, Farron, the jokes are always a great time. And thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. And I know this isn't Twitch, but I'll give you a huzzah to the tipper. Huzzah to that tipper. The money will go to Pebbles. I will buy Pebbles something nice. So we're going to wrap it up for today. Things that are going on this week in Benland. I do have a link in the side chat. I'm still raising money for top surgery, which some updates on that. I'm going to be doing it in April instead of December to try to give myself more time to put the money together. I'm planning on doing a marathon stream in the near future for the top surgery fundraiser. So I'll give you more information on that. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on Talk Heathen with Johnny P. Angel. So stop in for that. Other things going on this next week. On the 19th, I'm going to be on the Deep Drinks podcast with David McDonald. So be ready for that episode to come out. And I think that's all that's going on in Benland. So come join in for all the fun there. There's, of course, trivia nights on Friday. We didn't have trivia this week because I had something else going on last night, but I fully expect to come back to trivia next week and medical myths as well next week. And after this, as always, every single week we have, or at least every time that I'm here on Medical Myths, we have our after show, which we have our patrons and our channel members get access to the exclusive after show where you can either be in the side chat or you can be on the stream if you so choose. The links for that are on the Patreon. They're also in the patron Discord, and also for the YouTube members, I have one in the community tab listed for members only. So definitely come hang out with us. We're going to be having a good time. Rebus, I hope you join us this week because we're reacting to some fun things that you're going to enjoy. But a big shout out to the patrons. On the Patreon, we have Regios, Jody L, Pharmacy Sabrina, Tons of Mice, Uncle Beck, Haney Ball, and Kevin Downey. Thank you for the patronage. And on the channel membership, we have Rebus Win, who is our first ever channel member. Thank you for supporting the channel. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope to see you all in the after show where we're going to have a great time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everyone.